Today in the shop, we're going to work on some real old and damaged carbon fiber parts. Try to get them prepped up for their final finish and get them to look better than new, better than a factory ever made them. And if you'd like to look at this video in 4K on any device in the lower right hand setting of all YouTubes, there's a setting wheel. It looks like a wheel. Adjust it and it'll allow you to play this in 4K. Now, we do a lot of jobs in the shop that require paint and polishing and cleaning and customizing and among other things. But one thing follows almost every job we do. The first thing is get the parts prepped. And this video is about prepping old and damaged carbon fiber parts for a very nice shiny finish. This video is V30 in the V series of videos. V meaning the projects we worked on for Vlad. We started the season thinking we were going to have 3 restorations. Didn't exactly work out that way. Turned into 4. Now it's turned into 5 because I have parts, carbon fiber parts that need a restoration before we start the Motor Guzzi job. So these parts are very unique because they're not brand new. They're not in real good condition. I'm going to have to do some restoration on them, and I'm going to have to put a final finish on them. There's 4 parts. There's going to be very labor intensive to bring them back as well as we can. And on some of them, they're going to be, I think we're going to have to fudge it just a little bit because there's breaks in the carbon. But anyway, I'm going to try to share the information that might be helpful to you if you have some carbon fiber parts on your motorcycle. And keep in mind that what I'm going to be showing on, not this video, but probably the next one, is going to be to put a high gloss finish. We're going to do all the prep on this video. The high gloss finish, because a lot of the modern bikes that I've seen come with some pretty dull looking carbon fiber, and I know the people that I do my interaction in motorcycling with always like it when it's shiny. Now this is not a part I refinished. This is a part came from Europe this way. Vlad got me this part, and it has a beautiful, beautiful finish on it. I had painted some accent stripes, but the quality, this finish came out of the mold this way, and this is some real high-tech, high quality stuff. And again, thank you, Vlad. But what we're going to try to do is take some stuff that's really in rough shape and make it look as good as we possibly can. And there'll be some good information that I can pass on this video. So I want to start by sharing some basic information. I don't know if everybody knows this. There are 2 ways to make a part like this. This is part of my R1. I made this part. And what I did, I took the plastic part that came with the bike and covered it with a lamination of carbon, and then I put this finish on with sandpaper and special resin that goes on this because it's high temperature. But that's a whole different thing than when you have a part made in a female mold and the finish is already on it when you pull it out of the mold. So this is basically, we're going to pretend for this job that we're working on that we are doing this type of work where we have to put the finish on. So that's what this video is going to be about, how to prep it, and the next video will be how to paint it. And just mentioning on our video, we've made a lot of parts from scratch. I made the lamination, little parts like this, the parts that are on the side of the MT-09 on the foot pegs, the parts that are up around the windshield, the brackets, all of that's been made on our channel. And in fact, this is a part that I added to the windshield. All of that stuff is on the channel if you are serious about doing some carbon fiber work and putting on a high gloss finish. So I got to feed the fish, do the farm work, and get down to the shop. So feeding the fish every morning, always something I enjoy. Karen and I check out the garden every morning, do a little bit of weeding, a little bit of harvesting when things are ready, and so far this year has been a banner year. We have had nothing but good luck in the garden. We're already harvesting things. The radishes came up earlier than we thought. The roses have taken over the whole fence in the back of the house, and it just couldn't be a nicer year. But this time of year we normally don't do restoration work. This is a special favor for Vlad, a very good friend, and this is doing the work in the yard every day a little bit, something I enjoy, and so does Karen. We do it together. So for the people that have followed the whole V series of videos, You know, Vlad is still out trying to get exact matching paint. He actually picked up a whole nother set of bodywork that needs to be redone, so we didn't win on that one. And we got the Moto Guzzi. We've been using it to do little sandpaper tests. But here's the big issue. These carbon fiber parts are not in good shape. They don't have a nice surface. This one's got some damage in it. You can see the damage. I'm going to have to do a little something to repair that. Some of them have, looks like glue or something all over them. But we're going to try to make these as good as we can. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge. But today, it's prep day. So some of the basic things that I always do when I restore carbon fiber is I have 4 pieces, start with the smallest one first and evaluate what has to happen. Now, there's obviously been grease, dirt. This is like some kind of molding. There was a molding around both edges. A rubber glue has to be removed. So there's going to be a little bit of work to bring this down and get it clean. So this will be the first part I work on. But there's an important thing here. To always remember, never sand or grind or do anything until you get the part perfectly clean, because the sandpaper will work that molecules of that grit or oil or whatever down into the part, and you always wind up with fish eyes. Now part 2 is in a little bit better shape, but it's still got a lot of issues up here, and this, you can see the surface is really rough, and we're getting the carbon imprint through the resin. This is not aircraft quality stuff. I don't know what bike this is off, because again, Vlad has a giant collection of these collector bikes, and I never know which one I'm working on sometimes. This has some stuff has to be removed. This part is a little bit cleaner, but we're still going to do a super cleanup, super cleaning every part and evaluating if there's any cracks or breaks, anything I have to do before we start the refinishing process. This apparently is a front fender that's got, and this is going to have to be a repair area. 2 repair areas up here. This will be probably the most labor intensive of all the parts. This has a break up here. He wants to save these decals, and I don't know if, no, they're not underneath, they're just stuck on. I'm going to try, if I can, to just lightly sand these and put clear on top. He wants these. These are probably going to be, if he had to replace them, be hard to get. And he's trying to keep the bike, of course, authentic. Okay, so, but the biggest thing is going to be when we get to the repair of this. This is going to have to be repaired. Now, keep in mind what happens with carbon fiber. No matter what you do, if you were painting this part black, you could just Bondo this or CA it or whatever, sand it. But when it's carbon, you're only going to put clear on top of this. So if there's a defect, if I put 100 coats of clear on that, you can still see the defect. So this is something we're going to have to address, work on, fudge it, but we're still, the objective is to make it as good as we can in the end. Now this looks like the hugger, but you can see one of the problems is the carbon. This is an inexpensive way to make it. They made this with smaller pieces. There's a joint right here. Well, no matter how much clear I put on, I can't make that go away. There's a defect in the carbon right here. The surface is like 40 grit sandpaper, so we're going to need a lot of sanding on this part. Up here, and I don't know what this is all about. They made somebody did a repair on this already, but we'll try to make it. Again, we're not going to make this look like a brand new part, I don't think. There's another defect right here, a big giant one in fact. And where they tightened the bolts, they didn't put washers, proper washers underneath it. So this is a little bit better. This is going to require a little work. So we've got our work laid out for us, but the first thing, absolutely first thing, get these parts clean as we can make them, and I'll show how I do that. So the first thing is with any of these parts, this is ordinary. Let me try to show it. Simple green. Buy a gallon of it in Lowe's or Home Depot, you'll be good to go for a long time. This is great for cleaning any kind of residue off things. This gummy residue from the glue that was holding this little rubber molding on, I may have to use acetone or something on that. But in the meantime, I have like what amounts to be a fingernail brush. This part is really dirty. I always put a good coat of simple green on there. Sometimes you have to do this 2 or 3 times to a part, depending how dirty it is. If you don't do this, you run the risk of really having issues with fish eyes later on in the job. Now we only have to deal with this, the one side of this, so I'm not even going to worry about taking that off the bottom. Maybe I'll just have to sand it off. We'll see how it cleans up. Getting it clean, this side we're not going to see. This goes against the wheel, I guess. I'm not sure what this part is. But again, Vlad is a very fussy guy with his collection of bikes. He's got an enormous collection of bikes, and just like I am, he wants them all to be as good as he can make them. So what I want to try to get that molding residue off is, let's see how this works. Acetone, if acetone doesn't take it off, and acetone's not going to hurt, it'll clean off even cleaner. You can see the stuff, the residues, looks like it's softening it up. And if it doesn't, we'll just have to sand it or scrape it. This side I know is particularly dirty. Yeah, to get that cleaned up. But again, this side, you can see what comes off. This side we're not totally consumed with because you're not going to see this side, but I will try to get as much of it off as I can. And the last little bit of this I have to get off with, and this is very typical of this, the glue they use to hold rubber moldings on. It really doesn't like to just come off. Acetone does soften it up, and it does take several applications, but eventually even using a razor you can get it off, and then this part will be ready for some sanding. I don't want to sand any of this residue down into the finish. Now this is what this looks like. I got some of this, the grit off of the edge, and that was important. We still have some spots where whatever goes on here was ground and it's rough. Now the next thing is to go get some wet and dry sandpaper, probably 400 grit, and some soapy water, nice hot soapy water, and let's see how long it takes to get this part smooth and ready for its final finish. So we're going to start and see if the 400 Pro grade is going to work on this. I think it will. So what I want to do is a test and just see how smooth this will come out with the 400. 400 usually gives you enough of a grit, enough of an etch. I don't want to make it any rougher than I have to, because I'll have to, any little spot, if I go through on the tips of the carbon where it's high, the little mountaintops, you'll see it in the final finish. So this gets a little labor intensive, but this is the best way to do it, is just get that 400 grit etch, and this part will be ready for its finish. So once I'm done wiping this off with a clean paper towel, I have to make a way of holding this, make a little mount of sorts, and this part will be ready. And from this point on, not touch it, get any fingerprints on it or anything. So here is the challenge here, is to get an etch on this. This is a 400 grit etch. And that now up here, this part where the bolt is going up and down. If I were to keep sanding there, I'm going to go into the carbon. I cannot just sand this into shape, because you do wind up going into the carbon weave, and that's a real problem. Then you see that in the final part. I don't want to see that, even though this part is probably not real visible. But we do have a good etch on this. I've wiped it down with prep oil. This part now, as soon as I make a little handle so I can hold this, I'll do that with a bolt and vice grips. This part, we can move on to the second part. This part is pretty much ready for the day that we're able to put the clear coat on. And figuring out a way to hold the part sometimes can be tricky. This piece will be easy because we don't have to deal with the back. Pair of vice grips and a bolt that we're not going to be worried about, and that's a bolt hole that'll get covered. And that's a good way to hold it, and that part is ready. Now the next part, a little bit more complex, probably take a little bit extra time. Again, I always like to start with the easiest part, the simplest part, the smallest part. Work my way up to the big parts. Most of what we're going to do here today is just labor, but there's some real do's and don'ts, and one of the do's and don'ts is, again, and boy, I emphasize it on all the tutorial videos, do not sand something that's greasy. Step one is clean it any way you can. Now this part doesn't have any defects on it, so it's just going to be a question of a little bit of time sanding it and getting that proper etch on the part. Once the part has the proper etch, we move on to the bigger and more complex parts. And in this case, it's like mixing concrete, it's just labor. Now this part cleaned up pretty well because there was no glue residue, no real giant defects on it. So it just needed a nice etch with 400. We'll clean this up. wipe it down with prep soil, and this will be ready. Make a little handle for it. This one will be ready to go. Oh, this piece now is ready just to make the handle, but now you can see, and I wanted to show this. I don't know if I can show this up close. You see there's a spot up here? This part has a little bit of a wave in it. If I start sanding down into the carbon to make this flat, it's going to hit the carbon tops, and then that's going to be a little defective area, and I don't know if you see it. I don't want to run the risk, because what I can do that's a lot easier is just put an extra coat or two of clear on this when we're doing the clear on the next painting day. So this again has a nice handle, a bolt. So when it comes time to paint that, I'll have a way of holding on to it, and sometimes that can be a really difficult thing. So on the fender we have these broken, well, the finish is broken. It doesn't look as bad now that I look at it under fluorescent light, but I want to block sand these down as much as I can, and then if it turns into a white spot, the touch up is I'll just touch it with a Sharpie pen and see if that makes it any better. But the first thing is to wet sand the whole part down, 400 grit, and I want to also just lightly go over these decals. I don't want to scuff through to where I have a problem. Just the slightest little scuff on these will be fine. And then I'll do around it by hand. I can see where the edge is, and hopefully we can bury that all in clear. This piece has got a lot of curves and a lot of edges, and I've got to be real careful of those decals. But those decals have no clear at all over them, so I've got to be real careful about going through them. And the one on the right side already has a few scratches on it, so we're just going to do whatever we can to try to salvage them. This one looks a little better. But always to start with a part that's as clean as you can make it. And this whole piece I'm just going to do as carefully as possible. I work around those decals as best I can and get the edges nice and round and get these defective spots up here as good as I can make them. So after extensive sanding, most of this came out, but there's still little spots here. Also down here, these little white spots, sometimes they disappear. What they are is bubbles in the resin, and if I keep sanding, I'm going to be into the carbon and make a real mess out of this part. And this part, I have no idea what this is. It looks like they laid unidirectional carbon up in the front, and then one string hung out, and that's probably going to show. But if I sand any more on that, what's going to happen? I'm down into the carbon, and then you're going to see a giant defect. So this is old manufacturing stuff. See, and to get that finished, that they don't have a smooth finish, they either didn't have a real good mold to start with, or this is old technology before they came up with the modern vacuum bagging stuff that we have right now. This, I don't know in what year this bike is. And one final wipe with degreaser, and looking at all the little defects that were in this part, I'm not so sure about these decals. They really don't have the look of, well, once we go over them with clear. This one here is not perfect. And you never know if, when you put the clear on there, if it's going to dissolve it or what. But we're going to give it our best shot. And in the worst of all worlds, I'll have to sand those decals off. And he'll have to either get decals or whatever. But right now, we've one part to go. And we have had a really productive day straightening out these parts. Now, all of this kind of work that I do to restoration, I'm sure the mechanical part of it is no different that Luciano does or anybody that restores bikes. What happens is there's a lot of prep and a lot of cleanup and a lot of grease and a lot of dirt, and it just never ends. And getting that part done, that's the part nobody wants to do. But this is a part that if you don't do it, boy, do you pay later on. And it is, I have learned that the hard way. There's my little brush. If you don't scrub these parts and get all that dirt winds up somewhere in your paint job. This is, if you get nothing else out of the video, clean the parts and until you think they're clean, and then put a little more simple green and some M600 or degreaser if you have it, prep tool, whatever. But especially if there's oil involved. Oil winds up working its way into the paint job. It's horrible sometimes. Alright, we're going to get this cleaned up, sanded, and this will be the end of one very productive day. Now this part has those crazy carbon joints in it and a crazy edge here. I don't know what they were thinking when they made this part. See, if they did that and you were going to paint the part, nobody'd even know. But when it's clear carbon, boy, everybody sees it. And there's absolutely nothing I can do about that. All I can do is try to impart what I think is a nice, shiny, easy to clean, easy to maintain finish. And sometimes that's a little harder than it looks. It's labor intensive, and this took us the better part of a day to prep up the parts. But by the time I'm done with this part, we'll be ready. We'll just have to wait for a good day for the painting. And this is not going to be a 5-minute job. It's going to require 4 or 5 coats of clear, about an hour apart, 45 minutes, so it'll consume a whole day. But when we're done, we will have rescued these parts, and I'm real positive thinking that we're going to be able to rescue them, and they'll be, if not better than new, they'll be as good as new. So after spending a lot of time wet sanding this, you can see what this is, some kind of a patch where I can't see the carbon, and that's going to show in the final clear. The part is so wavy. Now the reason that is when they put this, I'm assuming they made this in a female mold, they didn't lay the carbon in equally, and it's the reason you have a lot of these little defects here that if I sand them more, if I sand that by the bolt hole, I'm going to go right through into the carbon. That's another defect. Up here, these little white spots, that's where there's no resin in between the carbon. So we're going to try to fill that with the paint when we actually paint it. I have a couple of tricks I can try to make this even better than it is, but basically these are like rescue dogs. You know, you can't, I don't know, there's only so much you can do, but I guarantee you it's going to look better than the day Vlad brought it over here. So as I finish up the day and I'm looking at the part, these are really rescue parts. These are really not, these are going to be really challenging to get that clear, to lay in all the defects and minimize what it's going to look like. The other choice you always have, if you have a part like this and it really looks terrible, is paint it black. And then you can do any number of things to make it smooth. But when it's clear and you just want to have a clear finish on carbon, the carbon's got to be laid in a mold correctly, and you've got to have none of those little waffle pockets where they didn't get any resin. But again, I think this is old technology. It looks old to me. It looks like something that's 20 years ago that they did, and nowadays you don't have that problem. The vacuum bagging stuff they have now, and the resin and the pre-pregs, you never have that problem. Anyway, we're going to try to rescue this. I hope there was something interesting on this video that you could pick up for your project, and it's, as always, anything we do for Vlad is always a labor of love. So in this ongoing series of videos, we've already finished a Buell, we've already finished a BMW. We are waiting for parts for the Motor Guzzi. We have parts yet unknown, and we still need silver paint. The biggest thing is silver paint to finish up the MV Agusta, and then we'll probably be he'll find some more bikes to buy or sell. Between Vlad and Luciano, there's constantly buying and selling, and me, I just hold on to these bikes that I love, buy a new bike every 10 years and leave it in my collection. Seems to work well for me. And thanks so much for watching and supporting our channel.